I'm Meredith Halverson, 31 years old, a senior data engineer at a fintech company in Raleigh, North Carolina. For 5 years and 7 months, I wired my parents $2,500 on the first of every month. That comes out to $167,500 total. Money I should have been putting into my retirement, into a down payment on a real house, into something for myself. Instead, it went to a checking account at a credit union in Wilmington, where my mother and father lived in a two-bedroom condo they'd been renting since 2019. They called it the medical fund. My father had a heart procedure in 2020, and after that, every conversation began with his cholesterol, his blood pressure, the specialist copays, the prescriptions that weren't covered. I believed every word for a very long time. Then on a Saturday in late September, I drove 11 hours from Raleigh to Wilmington to surprise my mother for her 62nd birthday. I brought a cake from her favorite bakery, a card I'd written by hand, and a small gold bracelet I'd been saving for since June. I knocked on the condo door at 2:15 in the afternoon. Nobody answered. I knocked again. A woman from the unit across the hall opened her door and asked who I was looking for. When I told her, she gave me a strange, careful look and said, "Honey, they moved out almost a year ago." I stood there in the hallway holding the cake, and I felt something cold move through me. The kind of cold that starts behind your sternum and spreads down your arms. I drove to a gas station, parked under the awning, and called my mother. She picked up on the fourth ring, and in the background I could hear, very clearly, the sound of an ocean. Not a bay. The ocean. Waves. Gulls. She asked me what I wanted, and I asked her where she was, and she paused for almost 3 full seconds before she said she was running errands. That pause was the longest 3 seconds of my life. If you've ever felt the floor tilt underneath you when you realized someone you loved had been lying for years, I want you to tell me about it in the comments. I need to know I'm not the only one. To understand how I got to that gas station, you have to understand how I was raised. My parents were not poor. That's the first thing I want to say, because for the longest time I told myself they were. My father worked 31 years for a regional logistics company in eastern North Carolina, retired at 58 with a pension and a 401k that, as I would later learn, had over $400,000 in it. My mother taught fourth grade for 26 years and pulled a state pension on top of that. They were comfortable. They were, by any reasonable measure of small-town North Carolina, doing well. But growing up, the language in our house was always about scarcity. We couldn't afford my school field trip to Washington. We couldn't afford the orthodontist, so my crooked bottom teeth stayed crooked until I paid for Invisalign myself at 26. We couldn't afford anything that involved me. My older brother, on the other hand, played travel soccer through high school. Travel soccer, if you don't know, costs about $6,000 a year between the club fees, the tournaments, the hotels, the gear, the private coaching. My brother had all of it. He had the new cleats every season. He had the goalkeeper camps in Florida every July. When he got into a state university and announced he wanted to transfer to a private school his sophomore year, my parents took out a Parent Plus loan and made it happen. When I got into the same state university 2 years later, my father sat me down at the kitchen table and told me, "We just don't have it for two of you. You're the smart one. You'll figure it out." I worked 3 jobs and graduated with $41,000 in student loans. My brother graduated debt-free. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand the soil this whole thing grew in. It wasn't one bad decision on my part. It was a 30-year pattern of being told that I was the strong one, the smart one, the one who could handle it, and that my brother was delicate, special, gifted, and needed protecting. By the time I was 26 and earning a real salary for the first time in my life, the pattern was so deep in me I didn't even see the water I was swimming in. So when my father called in the spring of 2020 and told me, voice breaking, that he was having chest pains and the cardiology bills were going to ruin them, I didn't ask questions. I set up an automatic transfer that same week. $2,500 on the first of every month. From my checking to theirs, I told myself it was temporary. Maybe a year. Maybe 18 months until they got back on their feet, but every time I tried to bring it up, there was a new emergency, a second procedure that didn't go well. a medication that costs $600 a month even with the discount card, a new specialist in Raleigh that wouldn't take their insurance. The story always grew another arm, and I always kept paying. My fiancé, Theo, was the first person who said it out loud to me. We'd been together 2.5 years at that point. He was a public defender. Calm, quiet, the kind of man who picks his words the way other people pick stocks. One night in February, he was washing dishes, and I was at the kitchen island looking at my bank statement, and he said, very gently, without turning around, "Meredith, do you know that you have less in savings than my paralegal?" I started to defend it. I started the same speech I'd given my friend Octavia, who'd been telling me for 2 years that something was off. I started saying my dad's heart, my mom's anxiety, the prescriptions, the copays, and Theo just kept washing the same plate, listening, and then he said, "When was the last time either of them asked how you were doing? Not a small talk. Really asked." I try to remember. I sat there with my phone in my hand and I genuinely could not remember. The last time my mother had asked me a follow-up question about my own life. The last time my father had called me without an ask attached to it. I told Theo I'd think about it. I didn't. I just kept wiring the money. 6 months before my mother's birthday, my brother got engaged. His fiancée was a pharmaceutical sales rep named Brielle, 28. Very pretty in the way Instagram people are pretty, with an apartment in Charleston that cost more than my mortgage. They got engaged on a beach in Maui. My brother posted about 30 photos. Maui, if you've never priced it, is not a place you go on a budget. The ring he gave her, which I saw in close-up on his Instagram, was a 2-carat oval that any reasonable estimate puts at $20,000 or more. I stared at that photo on my phone for a long time. I was sitting in my office in Raleigh on a Tuesday afternoon. I'd just finished a Sprint review. I had $83 in my checking account because rent had cleared that morning, and I stared at that ring on her finger, and I felt the first small, hot crack open up in something I'd been holding shut for 20 years. I called my mother that night to congratulate her. Before I could even get the words out, she said, "Isn't Brielle's ring just the most beautiful thing? Your brother has such taste." And I asked, the way you ask a question when you already know you shouldn't, "Mom, how did he afford that?" She got very quiet. Then she said, "Oh, your father and I helped a little. He's been saving." Don't be petty, Meredith. Don't be petty. I hung up. I sat in the dark of my apartment for almost an hour. Theo came home and found me on the couch and asked what was wrong. I told him I didn't know yet. But something was very wrong, and I was going to find out what. The week before I drove to Wilmington, I'd already started looking at things I should have looked at years before. I pulled my credit report. I checked the joint account I'd co-signed for my parents back in 2020 to make the transfers easier. I found a charge in August for $942 at a resort called the Sandy Pelican in Myrtle Beach. I found 3 charges at a restaurant called Coastal Smoke that were each over $200. I found a recurring subscription, $89 a month, to something called Premier Boating Club. Boating Club. My father had not, to my knowledge, owned or operated a boat in my entire life. He'd told me in March that he couldn't afford to renew his AAA membership and asked me to put it on my card. I sat at my kitchen table and I printed everything, 6 months of statements. I highlighted in yellow every charge that did not look like a medical bill. 81% of the transfers had gone to restaurants, hotels, retail, and something cryptically labeled Elite Leisure LLC. $0 in 6 months had gone to any pharmacy, hospital, or medical office I could identify. That is when I decided to drive to Wilmington. I needed to see the condo. I needed to see my mother's face when I asked her about the boating club. I needed the truth. And the truth, as I now know, was waiting for me back at that gas station, with my mother on the phone and the ocean in the background, and a 3-second pause that confirmed every single thing I had refused to let myself believe. I asked her where she was. She said running errands. I said, "Mom, I can hear the ocean." There was another long pause, and then she snapped at me. She said, "You're spying on me now? Is that what we've come to?" Not "where are you, sweetheart?" Not "why are you so upset?" Spying. As if my standing in a hallway holding her birthday cake had been a hostile act. I told her I was outside her condo and the neighbor said she'd moved out a year ago. She breezed in sharply and then she did something that I'll never forget for the rest of my life. She laughed, a small, almost embarrassed laugh, like I'd caught her sneaking a cookie. Then she said, "Honey, we'll talk later. Your father's about to tee off." Tee off? They were at a golf resort, on the coast. While I was $83 away from overdraft, while I was sending them $2,500 a month for medical care that did not exist, I hung up before I could scream. I sat in the gas station parking lot for 40 minutes. I didn't cry. I had cried about my family for 20 years, and I was finally completely out. What I did instead was open my banking app and cancel the recurring transfer. 5 years and 7 months of automatic giving ended with one tap. Then I called my credit union and froze the joint account. Then I called Theo. I told him everything in one long, unbroken sentence, and when I was done, he just said, "Come home. Don't drive angry. Stop at the next exit and drink some water. I'm here when you get back." I drove the 11 hours back to Raleigh through the night. By the time I pulled into my driveway, it was almost 6 in the morning. Theo was on the porch with coffee. He hugged me for a long time. Then he said, "Now we figure out the rest." The rest. The rest was bigger than I knew. While I'd been driving, my phone had filled with messages. 17 missed calls from my father, 9 voicemails. 4 texts from my brother that I want to read to you because I still have them. The first one said, "What did you do to Mom?" The second one said, "She's hysterical. You ruined her birthday." The third one said, "You've always been jealous of me, and now you're taking it out on them." The fourth one said, "Fix this or you're done in this family." Done in this family. I stared at that phrase for a long time. Done in this family. As if there'd ever been a family for me to be in. As if I hadn't been the one paying the cover charge for 30 years. I forwarded all 4 to Theo without comment. Then I called Octavia. Octavia is the friend I mentioned earlier. She's an estate attorney at a firm downtown, and she'd been telling me for 2 years that the pattern with my parents had a name. Financial exploitation. She'd told me, very gently, on at least 3 different occasions, that what they were doing was a crime in some states. I'd always changed the subject. Now I called her and I asked if she could meet me for breakfast. She said she'd be at the diner on Glenwood in 20 minutes. I told her everything over scrambled eggs. The condo, the ocean, the golf, the boating club, the Maui engagement, the don't be petty. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I love about her, and then she said, "Meredith, I want you to do 3 things this week. 1. Pull every credit report on yourself, all 3 bureaus. 2. Get a forensic look at the joint account. 3. Talk to your grandmother." My grandmother, my father's mother. She was 84. Lived in a memory care facility outside Greensboro, and I hadn't seen her in almost 2 years because my parents had told me she was too confused for visitors and that the staff had asked family to limit contact. Octavia tilted her head when I told her that. She said, "Meredith, that is not how memory care facilities work. Go see her." I drove to Greensboro that next Saturday. My grandmother knew me the second I walked in. She lit up like a porch light. She said my name 3 times. She said, "Meredith, I haven't seen you in so long, sweetheart. Where have you been?" I sat with her for 2 hours. We had iced tea. She told me very lucidly about my grandfather, who'd been dead for 14 years. She told me about her garden at the old house. She asked about my job. She asked about Theo, whose name she remembered without prompting. Then I asked her, careful as I knew how, about the old house. The house I'd grown up visiting on Sundays. The brick ranch on 2 acres outside of Selma. She told me, very matter-of-factly, that the house had been sold 3 years ago. That her son, my father, had handled the sale because she couldn't be bothered with all that paperwork, that the money from the sale was supposed to be put in the trust from me and my brother, the way my grandfather had wanted before he passed. She said she'd signed the papers. She said my father had told her it was going into a college fund for the grandkids, even though my brother and I were both adults by then. She said, and I want you to hear this clearly because I almost couldn't believe it when she said it, "I always wondered why neither of you ever thanked me for the money." Neither of us. ever thanked her. Because neither of us had ever gotten a cent. I asked her, gentle as I could, if she knew how much. She said $320,000, give or take. That was the sale price of the house. Her share, after she'd paid off a small mortgage and the realtor, was about $270,000. My grandfather had wanted that money divided equally between his two grandchildren upon his wife's wishes. I sat in that visitor's room with my grandmother's hand in mine, and I felt the second cold wave of my life, deeper than the first. My father had not just taken $2,500 a month from me for years, he had taken my entire inheritance. And my brother's, presumably, though for all I knew, my brother had been in on it. I kissed my grandmother goodbye and told her I'd visit again the next weekend. I meant it. I have visited her every weekend since. I drove back to Raleigh and I called Octavia from the car. She didn't say I told you so. She just said, okay, now we work. Octavia introduced me to a colleague of hers, a forensic accountant named Pamela Whitaker, who specializes in elder financial abuse and intrafamily fraud. Pamela charged me a flat retainer of $4,500 and told me that what we were probably looking at was a combination of three things. 1. Financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, which is my grandmother. 2. Breach of fiduciary duty because my father had been operating under a power of attorney when he sold the house. And 3. Possible wire fraud, because the lies about medical bills had crossed state lines via electronic transfers from me to them. Pamela said it would take her about 6 weeks to put together a complete picture. I told her to take her time. I had nothing to do for 6 weeks except not answer my phone. My father called 22 times in the first 9 days. My mother called 11. My brother stopped texting after the 4th message, but his fiancée Brielle, the Maui ring woman, started sending me long rambling voice memos about family unity and what your mother is going through. I did not respond to a single one. I let them all roll to voicemail and I saved every voicemail in a folder labeled with the date. Pamela told me to do that. Theo told me to do that. Octavia told me to do that. It's amazing how many people in your life will tell you to do the smart thing once you finally start listening. On day 12, my brother called from a number I didn't recognize. I picked up because I thought it might be the memory care facility. It was him. He said, "You need to start sending the money again, today." I said no. He said, "Mom is on the verge of a breakdown. Dad's blood pressure's through the roof. You're going to kill them, Meredith. Do you understand that? You're going to actually kill them with this." I asked him, very quietly, if he knew about the house. He went silent for almost 10 seconds. Then he said, "What house?" And I knew right then. I knew from the way he said it, not as a question. As a stall. He knew. He had known the whole time. I told him I'd be in touch through my attorney and I hung up. 6 weeks later, Pamela handed me a binder. It was 3 inches thick. I want to give you the headline numbers because they still take my breath away. Over 5 years and 7 months, I had transferred my parents $167,500. Of that, Pamela could trace approximately $9,400 to anything that could even loosely be called a medical expense, mostly pharmacy copays under $30 each. The remaining $158,000 had gone to a country club membership in Wrightsville Beach, a fractional ownership in a 30-foot fishing boat, 2 cruises, one of which was a 15-day Mediterranean trip in 2023, monthly fees at a tennis club, and almost $40,000 in cash withdrawals that simply disappeared into the air. My father, the man who couldn't afford his AAA membership, had a platinum tier card at a golf club where annual dues were $11,000. My mother, who couldn't afford to come visit me in Raleigh for my graduate certificate ceremony in 2022 because of medical appointments, had taken her sister and 2 friends on a girls' trip to St. Augustine that summer that cost almost $6,000. The Maui ring, by the way, Pamela traced it. My parents had wired my brother $22,000 in May, 3 weeks before the engagement. $22,000, out of money they had been telling me in the same month was not enough to cover my father's new medication. I read the binder cover to cover at my kitchen table over 2 nights. I didn't cry. I made tea. I took notes. I underlined things. By the end of the second night, I had a list of what I wanted. And at the top of the list, in capital letters, I had written, "My grandmother's money." Octavia filed 2 civil actions on my behalf in November. One against my parents jointly for the recovery of misrepresented funds on a theory of fraudulent inducement. The other with my grandmother as co-petitioner, against my father personally for breach of fiduciary duty over the house sale. My grandmother, in case you are wondering, had been evaluated by an independent geriatric psychiatrist 2 weeks earlier, who confirmed in writing that she was cognitively intact for purposes of testifying about the events of the sale. Octavia had been thorough about that. She is thorough about everything. My parents hired a lawyer. He sent a long, theatrical letter accusing me of elder abuse against my own parents for cutting off support. Octavia read it out loud to me in her office and we both laughed, the first real laugh I'd had in months. Then she wrote back. Her letter was 4 pages, and it included as exhibits the country club statements, the cruise receipts, the wire to my brother, and the bank records from my grandmother's house sale. My parents' lawyer withdrew from the case 3 weeks later, citing irreconcilable differences with his clients regarding the factual representations. I don't know exactly what happened in that office, but I have a guess. They tried to lie to him and he caught them. In January, the case against my father over my grandmother's house settled. Without going into details I'm not allowed to share, I will tell you that my grandmother and I both received what we were owed. I will also tell you that my father took out a home equity loan against the condo he had purchased, with my money on the coast, in order to pay it. The condo I had thought was a rental. The condo that was, in fact, a 4-bedroom on a canal, worth more than my entire net worth. Pamela had found that too. Of course she had. The civil case against both parents is still pending as of when I'm telling you this story. Octavia thinks it will settle by spring. The district attorney's office is also, separately, looking at whether to bring criminal charges for wire fraud, because Pamela's report was thorough enough that the FBI's local field office took a meeting on it in February. I don't know if it will go anywhere. Federal prosecution is slow and uncertain. But I will tell you what my father said to me on the only phone call I have taken from him since September. He called me from a number I didn't recognize in early March, and I picked up because I thought it might be Pamela. It was him. He said, "Meredith, please. We could lose the condo. Your mother can't sleep. We are old people, have a heart." I waited until he was finished. Then I said, "Dad, you sold Grandma's house and lied to her about where the money went. You lied to me for 5 years about medication you weren't taking. You wired my brother $22,000 for a ring while telling me you couldn't pay your AAA bill. I'm not the one without a heart." And then I hung up and I blocked the number. He has called twice from other numbers since. I block each one as it comes in. I no longer save the voicemails. My brother and I do not speak. Brielle unfollowed me on every platform after the lawsuits were filed. According to a cousin of mine I'm still in touch with, my brother told the extended family that I had a mental breakdown and that I was obsessed with money and trying to destroy our parents. I have not bothered to defend myself to anyone. The people who matter to me know the truth because they've read the binder. The people who don't matter can believe what they want. Theo and I got married in April. It was small. 26 guests. My grandmother came, in a wheelchair with her aide. She wore a navy blue dress and a pearl pin that had been her mother's. She cried during the vows. So did I. We held the ceremony in a courtyard restaurant in Durham and we paid for it ourselves. Every penny of it, with the money I'd freed up by no longer being my parents' ATM. The first dance was to a song my grandfather used to play on his record player when I was a little girl. Theo had found out about it from my grandmother and arranged the whole thing. I did not invite my parents or my brother. I had thought about it, very briefly, in some last spasm of the daughter I used to be. Then, I thought about my mother's 3-second pause. I thought about the ocean in the background. I thought about my brother saying, "What house?" and I made my peace with the empty chairs that were never going to be filled. The night of the wedding, after everyone had gone home, Theo and I sat on the porch of our little house in Raleigh and drank champagne out of the everyday glasses, because the wine glasses were already in the dishwasher. The neighbor's dog was barking at something in the yard. I had taken my shoes off. Theo took my hand and asked me what I was thinking. I told him I was thinking about the cake. The birthday cake I had carried up that hallway in Wilmington in September, with my mother's name written on it in blue icing. I told him I'd thrown it in the dumpster behind the gas station that night and that for months I'd felt guilty about it, like I'd thrown away something more than a cake. But I didn't feel guilty anymore. I told him that I finally understood the cake had never been for her. It had been for the mother I'd invented in my own head, the one who would have hugged me at the door and cried that I'd driven so far. That woman had never existed. And you cannot keep buying birthday cakes for a person who is not real. I will tell you what I have learned, because I think some of you needed to hear this as badly as I did. Family is not a debt you inherit. Sacrifice is not love when it only flows in one direction. And the people who tell you that you are the strong one, the smart one, the one who can handle it, are very often the people who have been quietly handing you the bill. Boundaries are not cruelty. Boundaries are the door you finally close after 20 years of standing in the cold, holding a cake nobody ordered. If you've made it this far, I want you to do something for me. I want you to look at your own bank statements. Just look. You don't have to do anything else today. Just open them up and look. And if you see something that's been bleeding you out for years in the name of love, I want you to know that there is a chair in a courtyard restaurant in Durham and a small woman in a navy blue dress who would tell you what I'm telling you now. You are allowed to stop. You are allowed to stop, and the world does not end. It begins. I think about that hallway in Wilmington more than I expected to. The cake in my hands, the blue icing already starting to sweat through the box, the way the neighbor across the hall looked at me with something almost like pity before she even opened her mouth. I think about how every single thing that came after, the lawsuits, the binder, the forensic accountant, the quiet courtyard wedding in Durham, was already written into the years that came before. None of it came out of nowhere. It came out of choices, mostly small ones, mine and theirs. My parents made a choice every month for 5 years and 7 months to take money from a daughter who was eating cereal for dinner so they could stand on the deck of a fishing boat in Wrightsville Beach. That wasn't a mistake. A mistake is a wrong turn. What they did was 1,000 small decisions, each one a tiny door they walked through, until they were so far inside the lie there was no version of themselves left that could find the way back. I made choices too. I chose for years not to look at my own bank statements. I chose to believe a story because the story was easier than the truth. I chose to call my friend Octavia and change the subject every time she got close to naming what was happening. Cause and effect doesn't care about your good intentions. It just keeps adding up the column. What I want to leave you with is this. I don't think being a good person means being endlessly available. I used to. I thought my decency was measured by how much I could absorb without complaint. That isn't decency. That's just a slow form of self-erasure, dressed up in nice language. Real decency, the kind I'm still learning, requires you to see clearly. It requires the courage to ask the second question, the one that makes the other person uncomfortable. It requires the strength to sit with the answer when it comes. I'm not angry anymore most days. Anger is exhausting, and it gives the people who hurt you a lease on rooms inside your own head. What I have instead is something quieter, a willingness to look at my bank account, at the people in my life, at myself. Theo says it best when he says that the people who love you do not need to be paid for it. They just love you. They show up. They ask follow-up questions. They sit on the porch with you at 1 in the morning, and they don't keep a tab. If you are sitting somewhere right now with a knot in your stomach because something I said sounded familiar, I want you to be brave today. Not loud, not dramatic. Just brave enough to open the statement. Brave enough to ask the question. The truth is already there, waiting. You only have to be willing to see it, and once you do, the rest, slow and uneven and sometimes terrifying, will follow.